The morning sun filtered through my bedroom curtains as I straightened my tie for what felt like the 100th time. Today was the day I'd been both anticipating and dreading for months, my daughter Sarah's wedding day. 25 years of raising her on my own, and now I was about to walk her down the aisle to start her new life. I stared at myself in the mirror, adjusting the collar of my simple black suit. It wasn't designer, wasn't expensive, but it was clean and pressed. That's all I could afford on my construction worker's salary. Sarah had offered to buy me something fancier, but I'd declined. Pride, maybe, or stubbornness. Either way, this suit would have to do. The house felt eerily quiet without Sarah's morning chatter. She'd spent the night at her maid of honor's place, getting ready with her bridesmaids. I could picture her now, probably a bundle of nerves fussing over every detail. She'd inherited that perfectionist streak from her mother. God rest her soul. I picked up the framed photo from my nightstand. Sarah at her high school graduation, beaming with joy as she held her diploma. We'd made it through everything together. The sleepless nights when she was teething, the homework battles, the teenage drama, the college applications. Every sacrifice had been worth it to see that smile. My phone buzzed with a text from her. "Dad, I can't wait to see you today. I love you so much." My chest tightened with emotion. This little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms was about to become someone's wife. Marcus seemed like a decent enough young man. Harvard law degree, came from money, treated Sarah well as far as I could see. But something in his eyes when he looked at me always felt distant, cold even. I shook off the thought. Today was about Sarah's happiness, not my insecurities. St. Matthew's Cathedral rose before me like a monument to grandeur. Its Gothic spires pierced the cloudy afternoon sky, and the heavy oak doors stood open, revealing glimpses of ornate stained glass and polished marble within. This wasn't our little neighborhood church where Sarah had been baptized. This was Marcus's family church. Old money, old traditions, old bloodlines. Cars lined the circular driveway. Mercedes, BMWs, a few Bentleys. I pulled up in my 15-year-old Honda Civic, its faded blue paint looking distinctly out of place among the luxury vehicles. The valet, a young man in a crisp white shirt, gave my car a barely concealed look of disdain as he handed me the ticket. Inside, the cathedral buzzed with hushed conversations and the rustle of expensive fabric. Women in designer dresses and men in tailored suits filled the ornate wooden pews. The air carried the scent of white roses and expensive perfume, mixed with the faint smell of old stone and incense. I recognized a few faces from Sarah's side, my brother Tom, my sister-in-law Janet, a handful of Sarah's college friends. But they were vastly outnumbered by Marcus's relatives and family friends. I caught snippets of conversation as I walked down the aisle. I just closed on the Hampton house. The yacht club membership finally came. Through Marcus is so lucky to have found someone. So, sweet. The way they said it made it sound like a consolation prize. I took my seat in the front row, designated for the bride's family. Across the aisle, Marcus's mother, Patricia, sat regally in what I was certain was a custom Chanel suit. She acknowledged me with the briefest of nods, the kind you'd give a waiter who'd brought the wrong wine. The organist began the processional, and my heart hammered against my ribs. In a few minutes, I'd walk my daughter down this very aisle and give her away to a man whose family clearly saw me as beneath them. You must be so proud of Sarah. I turned to find Marcus's uncle, a silver-haired man with perfectly capped teeth, extending a manicured hand. His smile was practiced, the kind politicians wore during campaign season. Richard Blackwood, he introduced himself. Marcus's godfather. "Jim Patterson," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm but brief, like he was afraid my calluses might be contagious. "Sarah's accomplished so much," Richard continued, his voice carrying that particular tone wealthy people used when they were about to deliver a backhanded compliment. "Getting her master's degree, landing that position at the nonprofit. Marcus has been such a good influence on her." I felt my jaw tighten slightly. "Sarah's always been driven. She got that from her mother. Oh yes, of course. Though Marcus has certainly helped elevate her social circle, introduced her to the right people, It's amazing what proper connections can do for someone from a more modest background. The word modest hung in the air like a subtle slap. I forced a smile, my hands clenching slightly at my sides. Sarah's made her own way in the world, I said quietly. Always has. Absolutely, Richard agreed, though his tone suggested otherwise. And now she'll never have to worry about, well, let's just say Marcus can provide for her in ways that perhaps... He gestured vaguely, leaving the sentence hanging. Before I could respond, the music changed, signaling the start of the bridal party procession. Richard excused himself with another plastic smile, leaving me standing there with his words echoing in my head. The message was clear. I wasn't enough for my daughter. I never had been, but today wasn't about me. Today was about Sarah. I straightened my shoulders and prepared to watch the most important woman in my life walk down the aisle. The moment arrived. Sarah appeared at the cathedral entrance, radiant in her grandmother's vintage lace gown that we'd spent months having altered to fit perfectly. Her veil cascaded behind her like a waterfall of silk, and her smile could have powered the entire city. She was absolutely breathtaking. I offered her my arm, and she squeezed it gently as we began our slow procession down the aisle. Every step felt weighted with 25 years of memories. Her first steps, first day of school, first heartbreak, first job interview, and now her first walk as a bride. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I whispered. "Thanks to you, Dad," she whispered back, tears threatening to spill over. "I wouldn't be here without you." As we approached the altar, Marcus stood waiting in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, his groomsmen flanking him like a wall of privilege and entitlement. He smiled at Sarah with genuine love, I couldn't deny that. But when his eyes briefly met mine, that cold distance returned. We reached the front of the cathedral, and Father Morrison, the elderly priest who'd officiated at this church for over 30 years, stepped forward with his worn Bible. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" he asked in his gentle, practiced voice. This was it. The moment every father both anticipates and dreads. I opened my mouth to speak the traditional words, but Marcus suddenly stepped forward, his voice cutting through the sacred silence. "Actually, Father Morrison, I think we can skip that part. After all..." He glanced at me with barely concealed contempt. "What exactly has he given her? Sarah's accomplished everything despite her circumstances. She deserves better than being given away by someone who's essentially been holding her back her entire life." The words hit me like a physical blow. Gasps echoed through the cathedral. Sarah's face went pale, her bouquet trembling in her hands. "Marcus," she whispered, horror creeping into her voice. But he continued, his voice growing stronger, more confident. "I mean, let's be honest here. Sarah's marrying up, significantly. She's finally getting the life she deserves, with someone who can actually provide for her, someone who matters in this world." The silence that followed was deafening. 200 guests sat frozen, witnessing my public humiliation. My daughter's wedding day, ruined by her fiancé's cruel words. I felt every eye in the cathedral on me, measuring me, judging me, finding me wanting just as Marcus had declared. My hands shook as 25 years of sacrifice and love were dismissed as nothing more than an obstacle my daughter had to overcome. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. I could hear Sarah's quiet sobs, could feel the weight of 200 pairs of eyes boring into me. Marcus stood there with that satisfied smirk, apparently pleased with his public demolition of my character, but then Father Morrison cleared his throat. "Excuse me, young man," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed to fill every corner of the cathedral. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding here." Marcus's smirk faltered slightly. "Father, I don't think—" "No," the priest interrupted, raising his hand. His elderly eyes, sharp despite his 70-plus years, focused intently on Marcus. "I think you're the one who doesn't understand. You see, you've just insulted one of the most respected members of our entire community." A murmur rippled through the congregation. Marcus's confident expression began to crack. Confusion replacing arrogance. "I'm sorry, Father, but I think you're mistaken." "James Patterson," Father Morrison said. turning to look directly at me with genuine warmth and respect. "Would you please stand?" My legs felt weak, but I managed to rise from my seat. The priest's kind smile gave me strength I didn't know I still had. "Ladies and gentlemen," Father Morrison announced to the congregation, his voice carrying clearly through the acoustics of the old cathedral, "I'd like you to meet the man whose name graces the children's wing of St. Mary's Hospital. The man whose anonymous donations have kept our food pantry operational for the past 15 years. The man who's built homes for 3 different Habitat for Humanity families, refusing any recognition or publicity." The murmurs grew louder. I could see heads turning, faces changing from curiosity to surprise. Marcus had gone very pale. "Father," I started, uncomfortable with the attention. But he held up his hand again. "The James Patterson Foundation has provided scholarships for over 50 underprivileged children in our diocese alone," he continued. "And every Christmas for the past decade, dozens of families have received anonymous gifts, groceries, toys, sometimes even rent money, all traced back to a certain construction worker who prefers to give in secret." Father Morrison stepped down from the altar, moving closer to where I stood. His weathered hands clasped mine with genuine affection. "You see, Marcus," he said, never taking his eyes off me, "you've chosen to marry the daughter of a man who embodies everything Christ taught us about humility and service. James Patterson doesn't need to announce his worth to the world because his actions speak louder than any words ever could." I felt my face burning with embarrassment. This wasn't how I'd wanted this to come out. Never. 15 years ago, the priest continued, addressing the now captivated congregation, a young widower walked into my office. His wife had just died of cancer, leaving him with a 6-year-old daughter and a mountain of medical debt. He was working 3 jobs just to keep their heads above water. Sarah's hand found mine, squeezing tight. Tears streamed down her face, but they were different tears now. "This man made me a promise that day," Father Morrison went on. "He said that once he got back on his feet, once his daughter was raised and educated, he would spend the rest of his life making sure no other family would have to suffer the way his had. And he's kept that promise in ways that would humble kings." The cathedral was completely silent now. Even the babies had stopped crying. "The construction company he works for? He owns it, has for 12 years now. But he still shows up in work boots and a hard hat every day because he believes in honest work. The modest house he lives in? It's mortgage-free, but he chooses to live simply so he can give more to others." Marcus looked like he might be sick. His mother, Patricia, was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something that looked almost like fear. "The college education that your bride received, Marcus? Every penny came from her father's construction earnings. The nonprofit where she works? Funded in large part by anonymous donations from a certain foundation. Even this wedding," Father Morrison gestured around the ornate cathedral. "Who do you think quietly paid for the flowers, the reception, the photographer? Sarah told me she'd saved up. But the truth is, her father wanted to give her the wedding of her dreams, without her ever knowing the cost." The transformation in the cathedral was immediate and palpable. Whispers erupted throughout the pews as guests processed this revelation. I watched faces that had looked at me with polite dismissal just minutes earlier now register shock, embarrassment, and dawning respect. "My God," I heard Richard Blackwood mutter to his wife. "Patterson, the Patterson Foundation. I've been trying to get on their board for years." Patricia Blackwood sat frozen in the front pew, her Chanel suit suddenly seeming less impressive. Her social circle at the country club regularly hosted charity galas to support various causes. Causes that, I now realized, many of them knew were funded by the mysterious Patterson Foundation. "I can't believe it," someone whispered behind me. "He's been sitting right there in his simple suit, and he's probably worth more than all of us combined." Sarah looked up at me with eyes full of wonder and pride. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me?" Before I could answer, Father Morrison spoke again. "Because that's not who your father is, Sarah. He doesn't do good works for recognition or status. He does them because his heart compels him to serve others, just as Christ served us." Marcus's groomsmen shuffled uncomfortably behind him. I recognized one of them from the society pages. His father ran a hedge fund that had been desperately courting donations from the Patterson Foundation for their pet charity project. The irony, Father Morrison continued, now addressing Marcus directly, is that you've spent this entire engagement looking down on the one man in this room who truly understands what it means to be worthy of Sarah's love. Not because of his bank account, but because of his character. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The confident, entitled young man who had publicly humiliated me moments before now stood exposed as someone who had completely misjudged the situation. Mrs. Wellington, the society matron from the third pew, leaned over to her husband and whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "Harold, isn't that the foundation that funded the new pediatric wing? We've been trying to get an invitation to their annual gala for 3 years. The social dynamics in the room had completely flipped. The man they'd all dismissed as a simple construction worker was revealed to be one of the most significant philanthropists in the state, someone whose approval they'd all been unknowingly seeking through various charitable endeavors. Marcus stood there, his face cycling through a spectrum of emotions, shock, embarrassment, and finally, a desperate attempt to recover his position. "I had no idea," he stammered, trying to force his practiced smile back into place. "Father Morrison, surely you understand that I was simply... Sarah never told me about her father's business interests." But his words fell flat in the cathedral's acoustics. The damage was done, and everyone could see it. Sarah stepped away from him, her wedding dress rustling as she moved closer to me. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the silent cathedral. "You never asked, Marcus," she said, her tone quiet but firm. "In 2 years of dating, you never once asked about my father's work beyond dismissing it as construction. You never asked about the foundation that paid for my education, or wondered how a single father managed to raise me so well on what you assumed was a modest income." Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. His carefully constructed image was crumbling before the eyes of everyone who mattered in his social circle. "Sarah, please," he tried again, reaching for her hand. "You have to understand, I was just trying to... surely you can see how this looked from my perspective." "I can see exactly how it looked," Sarah interrupted, pulling her hand away. "You saw a man in a simple suit and assumed he was beneath you. You saw someone who worked with his hands and decided he was worth less than someone who works behind a desk. You looked at the man who sacrificed everything to raise me and concluded he was holding me back." The silence stretched on as Sarah's words hung in the air. Marcus's groomsmen looked anywhere but at him, clearly uncomfortable with their association with his public humiliation. "But that's not who my father is," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "And after what you just said, I'm not sure I know who you really are either." The wedding that was supposed to be Marcus's triumph had become his undoing. Sarah stood between us now, her hand in mine, looking at her fiancé with eyes that had been opened to his true character. "Sarah, please." Marcus tried one more time, his voice breaking slightly. "We can work through this. I made a mistake, but..." "The mistake," Father Morrison interjected gently, "was in judging a man's worth by his appearance rather than his actions. In assuming that wealth equals worth, and that status determines character." Sarah looked around the cathedral at the assembled guests, then back at Marcus. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. "I can't marry someone who would humiliate my father, the man who taught me everything about integrity, sacrifice and unconditional love on what should be the happiest day of my life. I can't build a future with someone who looks down on the very values that shaped me." She slipped the engagement ring off her finger and held it out to Marcus. "I'm sorry, but this wedding is over." The cathedral erupted in whispers and gasps. Marcus stared at the ring in disbelief, his face pale and stunned. "Sarah, you're making a mistake." "No," she said firmly. "The mistake was almost marrying someone who could be so cruel to the man I love most in this world." As we walked back down the aisle together, arm in arm, I heard fragments of conversation from the pews. "Can you believe she had the courage to call it off?" "Good for her. Did you see what he said to her father?" "Patterson." I should have recognized the name. Outside the cathedral, Sarah turned to me, still in her wedding dress, tears of both sadness and relief streaming down her face. Dad, I'm so sorry I didn't tell him about the foundation, about everything you've done. I thought it didn't matter. I thought he loved me for who I was. I pulled her into my arms, holding my daughter close. It doesn't matter, sweetheart. What matters is that you saw his true character before it was too late. You deserve someone who respects the people you love. Someone who judges others by their actions, not their bank accounts. As we stood there, Father Morrison approached us, his kind eyes twinkling with what might have been the hint of a smile. "James," he said, "I hope you'll forgive an old priest for speaking out of turn, but I couldn't let that young man's words stand unchallenged. The measure of a man isn't in his possessions, but in his compassion. And you, my friend, have always been one of the richest men I know." 3 months later, Sarah met David, a teacher at the inner-city school that the Patterson Foundation helped fund. Their small, simple wedding in our neighborhood church was attended by 50 people who knew us for who we truly were. And when David shook my hand for the first time, he looked me in the eye and said, "Thank you for raising such an incredible woman. I can see where she gets her strength. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't what you do to those who wrong you. It's simply being so genuinely yourself that their attempts to diminish you only serve to reveal their own smallness." Marcus learned that day that calling someone a nobody doesn't make them disappear. Sometimes it just makes their light shine brighter for everyone else to see.